Okay, everyone, if you're ready, I'll begin. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Today, I'd like to talk to you about something a bit different, something that is very dear to me. So, serious topic today, and hopefully not too many asides. Some of you may know that I worked in Hargeisa, Somaliland, after my master's, which was a wonderful time for me. It was something totally unlike anything I had experienced ever in my life. I loved being stuck in camel traffic jams, for example. I did. Dodging hyenas at night, troubleshooting the internet connection. No, I'm kidding. It was actually really great. And I have very fond memories of the months that I spent there. Nothing quite beats sipping on camel milk whilst you're watching the sun melt into the savannah. It was amazing. Except, of course, for my job. My job was incredible. I was working alongside the most inspiring woman ever, apart from my mother, perhaps, whose name is Edna Adan Ismail. And she's just one of those people who's impossible to summarize because no words can do her justice. But I'll give it a go because I'd like to talk to you about the Edna Adan Foundation, which supports the work of Edna Adan. So, she was born in 1937 in Somaliland, which is in East Africa, at a time when it was part of the British Protectorate. If you want more information on the history of Somaliland, then please refer to the speech by our excellent colleague who's not here today, Alba. So Edna is the daughter of a very dedicated doctor, and she went to school in Djibouti at a time when Djibouti was under the French. So it was known as La Côte Française des Somalies. Education for girls was not an option in British Somaliland at the time. So there she learned her first foreign language, French. The language of Somaliland is Somali, for those who didn't know. And she was the first woman from Somaliland to be awarded a scholarship to England to go and study, which, by the way, was a journey that was done using 5 different planes. And 5 stop-off points until you get to England to refuel and all the rest of it, because this was in 1954. So she went there to study nursing and midwifery, and then, of course, she had to learn English, her second foreign language. A quick aside, you have to read this book. Look at it, you have to read this book. It is an amazing book. It's her memoirs, and I know that I've recommended many books in speeches before, but of all the book recommendations, if you just read one, this is the one in capital letters. So 50s jazz, swing, dancing, and lots of studying and work experience, of course, fill the chapters of her time in England, where she then meets the man who will later become her husband and also the president of Somaliland, making her first lady. And in those chapters where you see her life as First Lady, well, if you've read Michelle Obama's autobiography, Becoming, then it's like that, but better. I won't go into too much detail because I'll let you discover the book yourself. But later on, Edna works as a consultant, advisor, and then regional director for the WHO. And she leads the campaign against female genital mutilation, which I'll come to in a bit. And she becomes the first female minister of Somaliland, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. She receives a whole number of awards for her total dedication to humanitarian aid. I've left out so much, by the way. I've left out a massive chunk as well, which is about the war between Somaliland and Somalia, which tore the country to shreds. But that in itself has to be a separate speech, so I won't be going into that today. When Edna retired, instead of sitting down in Hyde Park Corner feeding the ducks, she decided to build a hospital in the poorest part of the capital city where people have never had access to healthcare, and on a former execution ground during the war. It started out as a maternity hospital in the early 2000s and is now a major referral hospital that has delivered some 25,000 or so babies, and has treated men, women, children from all corners of the Horn of Africa, presenting all sorts of ailments and illnesses. And because that wasn't enough, she then decided to build a university where the future doctors, nurses, midwives, dentists, vets, lab technicians, public health professionals, nutritionists, pharmacists, anesthetists, and more are trained. She works to reduce maternal mortality by training healthcare professionals, in particular midwives, who can be sent out to rural areas of Somaliland, population 4 million, where people in the bush do not have access to healthcare. So, quite the summary, right? An incredible person. And I haven't even said half of it. So but I'll let you discover it when you read her book, or for those of you who are trying to expose yourself to lots of English, she has done so many appearances on BBC Radio, BBC Radio 4, Women's Hour, Desert Island Discs, Radio 1, Radio London, all sorts of things. And if you have French, she has also done interviews in French, France 24, and things like that. Anyway, I said no asides. So the Edna Foundation is a UK-based charity. Well, there's a US one as well. And basically we support her work. We're a non-profit organization. We work together with the Edna Adan Hospital and the university to advance healthcare in Somaliland and throughout the Horn of Africa. Essentially, we're promoting safe motherhood by training midwives, by fighting FGM and empowering women to set themselves up as leaders of change. And for those of you who are UK based, our charity registration number is 1169725 if you want to look it up. Safe motherhood, in other words, fighting maternal mortality. To give you some figures, approximately 90% of these maternal deaths are preventable. Currently, less than 10% of births are attended by skilled personnel, which is really worrying. There are 73 deaths per 1,000 births, and on average per year, there's 175,000 births in Somaliland. Why is this happening? Why is the maternal mortality rate so high? It's actually one of the highest in the world. There are many complex factors. I won't go into all of them, but I'll stick to one main one, but just to give you an idea. There's a lack of antenatal care for those living in the bush, in the rural areas. And this leads to a whole range of issues like eclampsia, postpartum hemorrhage as well is a big killer. And also the complications arising from FGM, female genital mutilation. So I'm going to go into more detail about what FGM is, because often people tend to just leave it there. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around what it actually is. So essentially, it's a procedure harming the female genital organs for non-medical reasons. And there are many different types of FGM performed in over 25 countries around Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. And of course, that's a lie, because this immediately makes people switch off. Oh, places that don't concern me. Something, a totally different reality to my own. What is lesser known, what is not known as much, is that in addition to all of these so-called distant locations, FGM is actually performed beyond these borders by members of the respective diaspora. So it does happen around the world in more than 25 countries. And it happens in your countries. Another myth that I'd like to dispel is that, contrary to popular belief, FGM is not limited to particular religious, ethnic, cultural, or socioeconomic groups. And this is important. There are, as I said, different types of FGM that vary from culture to culture, all of which bring about the absolutely devastating and horrific physical and psychological damage to the young girl. The immediate effect, of course, is hemorrhaging. Within the next 10 days, girls experience retention of urine, dysmenorrhea, excruciating periods, and recurrent urinary tract infections, among other infections, given the fact that sometimes FGM is performed using non-sterile equipment. Again, I stress sometimes. While some women experience infertility, those who can conceive have complications during labor and also postpartum. So how exactly is FGM performed? And just a disclaimer, this is difficult to listen to. The child is tied down to a bed with her legs spread wide open, and this is to ensure that the child does not move, thereby avoiding any unintentional cuts. There is assistant an assistant who is there to further keep the child from moving. And then what follows depends on which type of FGM is performed. So it ranges from the so-called symbolic prick of the clitoris to its total amputation. And in the case of the latter, there is, of course, excessive bleeding and pain, and then the labia minora is removed, followed by the paring of the inner walls of the labia majora. This is obviously a traumatizing procedure that doesn't even cover it, and it often results in the child fainting, which makes the messy job easier for the circumciser. But of course, to avoid a repeat operation, the wound must heal. So the circumciser stitches the opposite sides of the labia majora together. And sometimes this is done using a needle and thread. In rural areas, however, this is done using thorns. At this point, medical disinfectants can be used if the procedure is being performed by someone with knowledge of dressing wounds. But on the other hand, traditional circumcisers might use other local methods depending on the culture. For example, they may crack an egg over the wound, sprinkle some herbs, incense, sugar, according to the local tradition. And then finally, to ensure a successful operation, the child's legs are bound together for a week, after which they may start taking baby steps with the ties slightly loosened. In total, the child's legs are bound for 2 weeks. You may be thinking that this doesn't sound like a problem that we would have today, given the fact that we have all sorts of movements that are ongoing, the rights of the child, the rights of women, the rights of girls, and that this wouldn't happen. But actually, what's happening is far worse. Over the past years, a new challenge has arisen, which is to eradicate the widespread medicalization of FGM. And this is when I really lost faith in humanity. Previously, traditional FGM procedures were common, people were speaking up against it, fighting it, and now some people have suggested a solution. And the solution is that now one person can go to a clinic where the equipment will be sterilized and where girls can receive anesthetic before the procedure. Of course, it's better to have anesthetic than to not have it because it reduces the pain during the procedure, but that's not the point. The point is not to eradicate the pain, but to eradicate the procedure itself. It doesn't change the fact that the girl will grow up with abnormal periods, pregnancies, labor, and feel no pleasure in sex whatsoever. But anyway, let's look back to Somaliland. The number of cases vary depending on which sources you consult, so there are varying statistics. The Somaliland Ministry of Health states that 97% of women in Somaliland have experienced FGM, but a 2017 report by Save the Children indicates that the figure is at 90%. In any case, the number is far too high, and this practice must be stopped in its entirety to protect women and girls. Generally, in Somaliland, some girls are subject to the extreme cut, although this is declining, with the current figure at 28%, according to Save the Children. However, the number of girls receiving the so-called little cut is on the rise. So we can see that there is a changing perception or acceptance of various types of FGM. Edna was the first Somalilander to publicly denounce FGM. This occurred in March 1977. And since then, Edna has been leading the anti-FGM campaign with the aim to eradicate it not only in Somaliland, but throughout the world. And by speaking out on the serious health risks of FGM and the fact that it was prohibited, that it is prohibited in Islam, Edna Adan's awareness-raising campaign soon became widespread. Gradually, and as a result of these efforts, human rights organizations collaborated with national initiatives, creating even more visibility on the issue, which is great. And when Edna was employed by the WHO to work in Djibouti, she launched the very first anti-FGM campaign that the country had ever seen. And then campaigns were relaunched in Somaliland with the help of UNICEF. Edna was invited to speak, has been and still is, of course it's paused now, invited to speak at countless conferences, high-level panel discussions, interviews, and more. And this if you go and you can look at them on YouTube, you will really see her total dedication and unwavering, unstinting commitment to ending FGM. In 2001, Edna introduced a module on FGM, a compulsory module in all healthcare programs. And recently, I think it was a year or two ago, the government stated, well, they passed a fatwa, which is a religious ruling, that FGM type 3 was declared illegal in Somaliland. So whilst it's not all types of FGM, it's still progress. The hospital led the very first research project on FGM in 2002, and they've been updating their findings in order to monitor the situation. That was one of the first things that they did. The hospital started, was launched, if I remember rightly, in 2001. The hospital provides counseling services to victims and their family members, and it's really well known as the spearheading institution to abolish FGM once and for all. Changing people's perceptions on FGM will take time, but it's a battle that, of course, we will all continue to fight for the sake of women and girls. So if you are looking to support us, if you are looking for a smaller charity for your donations this year, then please tell people about us. Please spread the message far and wide, or donate. We do have a Just Giving page and a website and all the rest of it, and a Twitter page. I am the Twitter page, by the way. And lastly, what you can do is you can raise awareness by talking about the issue, because the worst thing that you can do, dear interpreters, is to stay quiet. Thank you for your attention.